One of my favorite Onion articles is frustrated studio execs unsure how to convince public that Lego Pharrell Williams movie is actually happening. It may be one of their shorter articles, but it perfectly captures the state of the current film landscape. It's the combination of two stagnant yet popular film trends: the music biopic and the nostalgic IP reboot. The idea of a Pharrell Williams documentary presented through Lego is completely absurd. Two unrelated figures that feel like a studio executive took two fairly recognizable pop culture objects, stuck them in a blender, and greenlit the project without any consideration for what either of those two audiences would actually want. Pharrell Williams fans don't want to spend an hour and a half looking at a plastic representation of him, they want to see the man himself. Lego fans don't want a music biopic, they want an extension to the Lego movie series they love so much. Preferably uncanceling Lego Batman 2. I love Lego Batman, please bring him back, I beg of you. A Lego Pharrell Williams movie is such a perfect piece of satire that it becomes one of the Onion's best articles ever, despite only being a paragraph long. Look, we'll be the first to admit that saying the words Pharrell Williams Lego movie out loud sounds outlandish at best. But this movie is real. It will really be out in theaters on October 11th, 2024, and you can really go buy a ticket for it. Please, please believe us. It cost us millions and millions of dollars to make. This article is short, funny, and everything I've come to love from America's finest news source. The Onion is my personal favorite comedy group, if I can call it that. I buy their books, I watch their YouTube videos, and I'm the only person on earth who still watches their failed TV show. And one of the greatest joys for any Onion fan is watching the uninformed believe their silly absurdities. For nearly every Onion article on social media, you can look to the comments and read the reaction of someone duped by them. And it's easy to make fun of them, but it's also understandable given that sometimes the actual news can seem just as absurd, but end up being real. And that's exactly what happened here. On a Reddit thread linking to the article, there are dozens of comments reacting to the article as if the Lego Pharrell Williams documentary is real, and dozens of comments responding to them explaining that this is The Onion. It's not a real movie, this is satire. And the thing is, it is a real movie. For once in The Onion's history, the absurdity in the headline is real. Piece by piece, the Lego Pharrell Williams documentary is a very real movie, and the article is satirizing how difficult it is to believe. I myself have watched it several times, and I'm gonna be honest with you, I still kinda can't believe it exists. When I first heard it announced, I could not believe my eyes. Or my ears, I guess. I don't know why I wrote down eyes. Once it had sunk in that yes, this was a real movie that was really in development, I told myself, okay, they may have greenlit this movie, but it will never, ever release. There have been several canceled Lego movies at this point, and this is likely to be just another one added to the pile. But something about this movie got me hooked, and I closely followed its development. I read article after article, checking in every few weeks to make sure I had not missed anything. And I am being completely honest when I say that Piece by Piece was my most anticipated film of 2024. Minus Megalopolis, of course. I mean, it's Megalopolis.
What do you think of this boner I got?
When Piece by Piece finally came out, I could not believe what I was seeing. They really made a music documentary entirely in Lego animation. Not like real Lego animation, but like the fake one that they do in the Lego movies. The movie starts with Pharrell himself justifying the format of the film.
What if nothing's new? What if life is like a Lego set and you can put them together whatever way you want? But you're borrowing from colors that already existed.
It's not a great justification, but hey, it's a pretty cute little one, right? It's poetic and sentimental, and it seems to mean a lot to Pharrell. Lego is an intensely creative act, but it's using what other people made and brought to it. He may be the creative force behind it, but his work relies on the other people in his life giving him the tools that he needs. Decent metaphor. I buy it. Or at the very least, I'm conditionally willing to believe it for the duration of this movie, same way I'm willing to believe in, like, Iron Man. And as the movie goes on, I bury those thoughts in the back of my head. I see that the animated format can make clear visual representations of his statements, making the figurative literal in the context of the film. When Pharrell says that he sees color when he listens to music, I can see that on the screen as well. When he says that a producer came out of nowhere, the record company rockets in like a spaceship. When he says that Snoop Dogg towered over him, we can see Snoop Dogg with extra blocks on the bottom of his little Lego legs. And similar to the mainline films, there is a comedic component to seeing Lego minifigures perform complicated actions while restricted to the format. But at no point during the film do I think, wow, the Legos really are a great metaphor for the creative process. Instead, I constantly think to myself throughout the entire movie, why the hell is this in Lego? It might work fairly well when depicting abstract concepts, but it's a whole nother thing when Lego minifigures are protesting disproportionate police violence against black people. That's right, in the middle of our goofy little Lego movie, we have a Black Lives Matter protest. And I'm not the only one who seems confused by this choice, even the people being interviewed seem confused as well. Interviewees will frequently be puzzled at the idea that this is going to be a documentary animated in little plastic blocks. Their interviews are recorded, and they are ostensibly under the impression that they are telling their stories in order to reveal the truth, their history. But they will never get to be on the screen. They're not in the movie. Their Lego personas are. It's a format that fascinates me. Not just because the idea of a Lego Pharrell Williams movie is very funny, but also because I'm interested in the very idea of an animated documentary, and the conflicts that are inherent to them. Because if you think about it, an animated documentary is an oxymoron, a paradox. A documentary's power is usually understood in its ability to explain, to present reality to us in a way that lets us learn new things about the world. In contrast, a typical animated film is made to create an artificial world in unreal form for us to believe. They're trying to do completely different things. Documentaries and animated movies both have very different production cycles and very niche audiences. An animated film is incredibly difficult and expensive to make and has a limited market. Each frame is made with care and craft, and to me, every piece of animation is a miracle of creation. So much work goes into them. On the other hand, documentaries are, to overgeneralize and oversimplify an entire genre, relatively cheap to make. All you need is a camera crew, a journalist, maybe a few subjects, and you can make remarkable work. Heck, you don't even need a journalist or professional film crews. And it may not feel like it, but every time you take your phone out and record whatever, you are, in effect, making a documentary, even if it doesn't feel like it. You don't necessarily need all the setup that a narrative film would have. And because of this, it's no surprise that most of the earliest films ever made were simple vignettes documenting pieces of daily life. People almost certainly did not jump out of the way when watching the arrival of a train, but they did believe that they were watching a real moment of time and place that they had never experienced. That the documentary could show us the truth beyond what our eyes could allow. In what is often considered the very first film ever made, Sally Gardner at a Gallop, Edward Muybridge and Leland Stanford took a series of photographs of a horse mid-stride in an experiment to understand the exact motions and positions the legs would take. A horse's limbs moved too fast for a normal person to grasp, and the camera allowed them to see what their eyes could not. This is the legacy of the documentary, a medium that can capture and document the truth of an experience in a way that we can never do ourselves. On the other end of the spectrum, the development of the animated film attempted to do the complete opposite. Early animation took the role of magic and trickery, illustrating frame by frame to create the illusion of movement. Animation created the image of whole new worlds that did not and could not exist in reality. In Winsor McCay's film Gertie the Dinosaur, special care was taken in order to make the illustrated dinosaur react as realistically as possible. McCay made sure to make the audience believe in something that did not exist, giving Gertie believable breathing and movement. It was a great success, and a few years later McCay would use what he learned for his biggest project yet, the first animated documentary. While Gertie the Dinosaur was an experiment in illusion, McCay's next project used animation for something completely different. In 1918, he released The Sinking of the Lusitania, a short animated film depicting the infamous 1915 German torpedo attack on the ship of the same name. Unlike Gertie, this film wasn't about fantasy. It was about recreating a historical event for audiences who had never seen it. At the time, there was no real footage of the Lusitania disaster. No cameras rolling as the ship went down, no surviving film reels capturing the chaos. McCay's animation was, for many, the closest thing to witnessing the tragedy firsthand. But while the film was presented as a documentary, it was also deeply stylized and dramatic, framing the event in a way that persuaded Americans into joining World War I. This raises an important question. If a documentary's power lies in its ability to capture reality, then what happens when that reality has to be drawn by hand? McCay wasn't just showing what happened, he was interpreting it, constructing an emotional narrative that aligned with the political climate at the time. His film wasn't a neutral retelling of events, it was a persuasive piece meant to stir outrage. And yet, The Sinking of the Lusitania remains one of the first examples of animation being used in service of the so-called historical truth. It set the stage for future filmmakers who would turn to animation when real footage wasn't available, or when reality itself was too difficult to capture. But when looking at modern animated documentaries, it's clear that the decision to animate is often more than a technical necessity. It's an artistic choice. Flee is an animated documentary that tells the true story of Amin, a refugee from Afghanistan, as he recounts his harrowing journey to safety. The film follows Amin as he shares his past for the first time, revealing the struggles that he and his family faced while fleeing the Mujahideen, seeking asylum in Russia, and enduring years of fear and uncertainty before finally finding a home in Denmark. The film uses animation to protect Amin's identity while also bringing his memories to life in a visually expressive way. It blends personal reflection with historical events, illustrating how his trauma continues to affect his life. But more than that, the animation itself becomes a form of truth. Not because it perfectly replicates reality, but because it allows Amin to safely tell his story at all. In this way, animation can, paradoxically, be the most truthful way to present a documentary, preserving both the facts of the story and the safety of the storyteller, because it gives Amin an empathetic face while still remaining anonymous. Flea is a masterpiece. It was my favorite movie in 2021, and it remains the only film to be nominated for Best Documentary Feature, Best Animated Feature, and Best International Feature Film all at once. It's a unique combination of traits, excelling in multiple categories, and there's really nothing like it. Unlike traditional documentaries that rely on direct footage, Flea visualizes Amin's memories, some of which are hazy, fragmented, or distorted by trauma. The film doesn't just recreate events as they happened, but captures how Amin remembers and feels about them. Animation is choppy and disjointed, avoiding the usual fluidity you would see in most animated films. It fluctuates between different animation styles, clear, detailed sequences for strong memories, and rough, abstract sketches for traumatic or suppressed moments. This shift in visual style reinforces the idea that animation is not just a replacement for live-action footage, but an artistic tool that can shape meaning and emotion. And while Flea is almost entirely animated, there are occasional moments of live-action footage that is shown in between the animated sequences. Truth is constructed through recollection, rather than objective documentation, but that recollection is not complete. The combination of animation and documentary footage might give us a larger, more complete picture, but there are still holes that cannot be filled in no matter how hard we try. We cannot take the animation as truth, we cannot take the live action footage as truth, and we have to deal with the fact that this story will never be complete. There is no definite story or end, no clear takeaway or meaning, just people talking about what they have and doing their best. And it's interesting to contrast this with a film that does the complete opposite. Ari Folman's Waltz with Bashir is both a deeply personal and political movie that explores the instability of memory, the lingering effects of trauma, and the burden of guilt. The film follows Folman as he attempts to reconstruct his missing recollections of the 1982 Lebanon War, a war that he was a direct participant in as a former Israeli soldier. He interviews former comrades, trying to piece together events he should remember but cannot. The documentary blurs the line between memory, dream, and reality, using animation to visualize the fragmented, unreliable nature of traumatic recollection. From the beginning, Waltz with Bashir embraces a surreal, almost hypnotic quality. Folman's memories, when they do surface, are exaggerated, distorted, or entirely absent, replaced with haunting, surreal imagery. But what's more unsettling than what is shown is what isn't. For much of the film, Folman remains unaware, or perhaps unwilling to admit, what exactly he did during the war. The gaps in his memory are not just the result of trauma, they're an escape from confronting the full weight of his complicity. The film's animation style, a sort of stylized rotoscoping, enhances this sense of detachment. It allows Waltz with Bashir to explore not just what happened, but what it felt like to be there, at least for him. War veterans often recall events in ways that are heightened, fragmented, or even fictionalized over time, and the film embraces that phenomenon rather than resisting it. Because for Folman and his fellow soldiers, war has become so surreal that it no longer feels like reality. But the closer that Folman gets to the truth, the more the film refuses to let him look away. Folman was a direct participant in the Sabra and Shabala massacre, a mass killing of Palestinian and Lebanese civilians in Beirut, Lebanon in September of 1982. The massacre was carried out by the Phalanges Militia, a Christian Lebanese paramilitary group, with the complicity of the IDF. Thousands of civilians were killed. According to the film, Folman did not directly commit the killings, but he was there. He and his fellow Israeli soldiers fired flares into the night sky, illuminating the refugee camp so that the massacre could be carried out by others. He can claim that he was an observer, but his inaction made him complicit. This realization creeps in slowly, the film forcing him and the audience to sit with the implications. The most devastating moment comes at the very end, when the film suddenly shifts from animation to real archival footage of the massacre's aftermath. Dead bodies, real ones, everywhere. After spending the entire runtime in Folman's reconstructed memories, the audience is suddenly confronted with the raw, unfiltered truth. The shift is jarring in its reality. The sudden presence of real corpses, real mourning, and real suffering is the film's final, undeniable statement. This happened. No matter how much the mind may obscure or distort the past, the truth remains. In the end, Waltz with Bashir is not just a documentary about war, it is about memory, responsibility, and guilt. The film's use of animation allows it to navigate this interior landscape of the mind, capturing the way that trauma alters perception. But it ultimately refuses to let that trauma be an excuse. The real footage at the end strips away the comfort of a false memory, forcing both Folman and the audience to acknowledge the past. Here, animation is not just a stylistic choice to support the documentary, but the film critiquing itself. Animation, cinema, and conventional storytelling as an entire medium recenters broad events into digestible chunks that we can easily distance ourselves from, individualizing a history that is inherently communal. Fullman's animated recollections create an emotional barrier that is finally shattered by the archival footage. The live-action documentary exists in contrast to the animated narrative, an image of the truth against the simple narrative a film provides. Of course, this is the charitable interpretation. From a less charitable point of view, Waltz with Bashir is an example of the so-called shooting and crying war film. A film that, while putting a spotlight on the atrocities of war, centers the experience of the perpetrators more than the victims. And that is a very understandable accusation here, as we follow the trauma and memories of a soldier complicit in war crimes without outright expressing any attempts to actually address that injustice. From this perspective, we can see the meaning behind its nature as an animated documentary much differently. For many, the live-action footage does not place the victims of the massacre in a more sympathetic position than the killers, and does not excuse the rest of the film. Despite knowing that one is real and the other is not, for many, animation has a special power to it, an effective way of producing emotion, spectacle, and even beauty that the documentary footage might not overpower. That perspective is a much more critical one, implying that art has such a power that it might obscure our view of the truth, even if explicitly contrasted against each other. If Waltz with Bashir attempts to present animation as a veil obscuring truth, the film Tower takes the opposite approach, using animation to construct a clear, almost hyper-real version of the past. Tower recounts the 1966 University of Texas Tower shooting, one of the first mass shootings in modern American history. Unlike both Flea and Waltz with Bashir, which lead into the subjective nature of memory, Tower reconstructs the events as accurately as possible, transforming eyewitness testimony into an almost immediate moment-to-moment experience. Through rotoscoping and interviews, Tower creates a stylized but vivid recreation of the shooting as if it were unfolding in real time. The animation allows the audience to move through the scene, following survivors as they experience confusion, fear, or even moments of heroism. But what makes Tower particularly striking is how it treats the concept of truth. Instead of deconstructing memory, Tower reconstructs it, not just as a historical event, but as an emotional experience. The film doesn't just document what happened, it attempts to recreate the emotions of the people who lived through it. The film presents these individuals not as distant historical figures, but as young students caught in an unimaginable moment. And through the use of animation, it preserves the kind of timelessness. The people on screen are not bound to their present-day selves, but remain as they were in 1966. Their memories remain as vivid as ever. This approach poses a different way of approaching documentary filmmaking. If animation is used to reproduce an event as if it were actually happening in the present, does that make it any less true? Traditional documentaries tend to present history as something locked in the past, but Tower refuses to let that distance exist. It makes history both unreal and present. And then, in one of the most powerful moments of the film, Tower makes a shift. The animated versions of the survivors fade away, replaced by the real people they represent. We see that they are now decades older, recounting their experiences in live-action interviews. It's a transition that reaffirms everything the film has been doing. The people in the animation were never fictional. They were always real, always present. Not just reconstructing the past, but giving voice to those who actually lived it. In the end, Tower doesn't ask its audience to look at history as something distant and unchangeable, but as something that still resonates today. By using animation, the film makes the past feel immediate, ensuring that the stories of those who lived it are not just remembered but felt. Because at the heart of every documentary, animated or not, is the same fundamental goal: to capture a truth that might otherwise be lost. For all of human history, art has been an outlet to make the ethereal eternal. We embed stories that express ideas, events, and even people into the more permanent material world through art. But the act of documentation is never neutral. It is always shaped by the medium, the artist, and the perspective through which the story is told. Animation, in particular, forces us to confront this reality. It cannot pretend to be a clear window into the past, but instead makes its construction explicit, reminding us that all storytelling, even in documentary form, is a process of interpretation. But paradoxically, this doesn't mean that animation makes documentary filmmaking less truthful. It expands the way that truth might be told. Each of these films, in their own way, demonstrates that animation is not an obstacle to the truth, but a tool for revealing it. Truth in documentary has never been about raw, unfiltered reality. It has always been about perspective, about taking a history that is intangible and messy and making it comprehensible to others. Animation allows filmmakers to reconstruct the past, fill in the gaps where footage does not exist, and depict inner realities that cameras could never capture. The animated documentary is not an illusion but an invitation, a place that can make us see, feel, and understand stories that might otherwise fade into obscurity.